In July 1405, ancient records tell of a Chinese emperor who orders an armada of 300 ships and 30,000 men to set sail for the western seas. In charge is one of the greatest seafarers of all time, Admiral Zhang He. At the heart of his fleet are huge treasure ships, almost double the size of any other ship of the time. These ships are laden with gifts for the rulers of the many lands he visits. Spanning 3 decades, Zhang He will lead 7 vast expeditions to kingdoms as far as India, the Middle East, and Africa, covering 25,000 miles of ocean. But within years of his death, it is believed Chinese officials destroyed all records of the treasure ship voyages, and China turned its back on the world. Now, 6 centuries later, the truth about Zhang He's story is being pieced together from the few scraps of evidence that remain. Who was this extraordinary man who led an armada halfway round the world 8 decades before Columbus set sail for America? And what was the true purpose behind his voyages? Our story begins in Yunnan, where Zhang He was born in 1371. Separated from China by rugged mountains, it was a remote outpost of the vast Mongol Empire, which Genghis Khan had forged from Europe across the roof of Asia to the Pacific Ocean. Zhang He's family most likely migrated across the continent as the empire expanded, and just like some people in Yunnan today, he was a Muslim. He would have been proud that his father and grandfather both had the title Hajj, in honor of making the long pilgrimage to Mecca.
Zheng He 就很喜欢听他的祖父和他的父亲讲，坐大船啊，看看各个国家的风土人情啊，看看各个国家的这些珍禽异兽啊，所以就打开了他的眼界。
There are many anecdotes about Zhang He, but only scraps of documentary evidence remain. Amateur historian Mr. Xu Kede has been studying Zhang He for 40 years. The starting point for his research is a memorial inscription commissioned by Zhang He for his father's tomb.
这块碑啊，是在600多年前就在这个地方被一些杂草遮盖起来。这一块墓是郑和在出使西安前，为他父亲写了一块墓志铭。从碑上可以了解到郑和，他的祖父当过云南省的省长，他的父亲是滇阳侯，所以是很有钱人的家庭。
嘿，等会儿啊！
他的小时候是非常幸福的。
But that happy childhood is suddenly cut short. Out of nowhere, troops suddenly swarm into his village, massacring everyone in their path. His father is killed in the mayhem. The invaders were part of an army of 250,000 Chinese troops that tore into Yunnan in 1381. the Ming Emperor was determined to oust the local Mongol warlords and make Yunnan part of China. His elder brother escaped, but Zheng He was not so lucky. Appalling though his situation was, Zheng He's capture was to create opportunities he would otherwise never have had. But in keeping with the brutality of the age, he would have to pay for them at a terrible personal cost. In 1381, the 10-year-old prisoner, Zheng He, is taken to the Ming capital of Nanjing. According to ancient custom, the sons of defeated enemies were castrated by their victors, and Zheng He suffers the ultimate humiliation. The task was performed with little concern for the consequences. Penis and scrotum severed in one cut. A plug was then inserted in the urethra to prevent scar tissue from closing. Some were no more than 9 years old. But tradition mandated that the emperor be the only man in the palace. So there was a need for a steady supply of young eunuch servants. This is the life Zheng He seemed destined for. But his fate changes yet again. By 1390, as a teenager, he is in Beijing and a member of the household of Prince Judi. Over the years, the prince and his eunuch forge a close bond. They fight side by side in Judi's military campaigns against the Mongols, and Zheng He lives in his palace. Mr. Xu has spent years gathering images and folklore about Zheng He, which offers particular insight into his legendary hero.
他在宫廷里边有长老才智。第一，他陪着皇帝的儿子读书，这个时候长了很多知识。第二，他有拜这个一个叫做过师的一个和尚，姚管孝。第三个，他跟朱棣在一起，每天要借助很多大官贵臣，他去了解了很多这个朝廷里边的一些处人哲学。
When Zheng He is 31, Judi seizes the throne and declares himself the young Le Emperor, or Emperor of Perpetual Happiness. Outraged, government officials refuse to support him. Young Le promotes a number of palace eunuchs to positions of power. Zheng He is the rising star in this clique. And the emperor clearly has great confidence in his abilities. Zheng He had already been appointed director of palace servants and head of palace construction. But in 1405, the emperor summons Zheng He to the throne room and presents him with the most ambitious project he has yet conceived. Young Le believes that as emperor, he is not only the semi-divine ruler of China, but also of the entire world. 10,000 nations overseas must benefit from his goodness and truth and pay him their respects. To achieve this, he will send a vast armada to the Western Oceans. And the man he wishes to fulfill this ambitious vision none other than his trusted eunuch, Zhang He.
那么为什么要派郑和不派其他人呢？那么姚广孝就说了一句话，朱棣呀就问姚广孝，就说我们宫廷里面选哪一个人出去率领船队到下西洋呢？姚广孝说，朝中就是宫廷中无以伦比，就是郑和啊，除了郑和以外，没有哪一个可以比他，因此就派郑和。
奉天承运，皇帝出使西洋，赐尚方宝剑。
因为郑和有很多条件，他的身材魁伟高大，他有才学，他也懂伊斯兰文，他有信仰佛教，有时他有信仰道教，所以说就适应在各地方。
The imperial edict orders the construction of hundreds of warships and mighty treasure ships. At the age of just 34, Zhang He is set to command the most powerful fleet the world had ever seen. One that would take China to the most distant lands of the known world. The first priority was ships. From 1405 onward, more than 1,000 vessels were built or refitted for imperial missions. Nanjing's Dragon shipyard, the biggest in the country, is turned into a production line. But the use of dry docks, 400 years before they were first used in the West, was the key to an astonishing rate of production. It was said half the trees in southern China were consumed in the process. Already famous as superb shipbuilders, the Ming Chinese proceed to build ships so large, they were not matched in size until the 19th century. Sources indicate that Zhang He's treasure ships were 138 meters long and 56 meters wide. That's far longer than Christopher Columbus's Santa Maria, and bigger than a football pitch. These megaships were said to be like floating cities. The Santa Maria had a crew of 90, but Zhang He's flagship is believed to have carried 1,000 people, as well as animals, provisions, even fish tanks, and huge quantities of precious items like porcelain and silks to trade. We're told the fleet comprised many other smaller vessels. Ships for carrying horses and livestock, 100 meters long. Ships for transporting grain and food supplies, over 80 meters in length. And 180 warships, each around 60 meters long. There were even special ships for transporting water. What's more, there's an account of how the treasure ships were guarded as the 300-strong armada sailed in formation around them. On board with Zhang He is a young Muslim translator called Ma Huan. In 1433, he published a chronicle of his years at sea. It becomes the main historical source about the places and peoples Zhang He's fleet encountered.
Over vast expanses of huge waves, we pass through the various countries with their different seasons, climates, landscapes, and peoples. In that land, there's a stretch of snow-white floating sands. When the sun or moon shines, it sparkles brilliantly like ripples on the water. All the craftsmen who make and inlay fine silver and gold and other such articles produce the most refined and ingenious things. The people of this country profess the Muslim faith. There is frankincense, dragon's blood, myrrh, and even strange beasts.
But Marhuan's accounts, curiously, say nothing about the size of the treasure ships, leaving the door wide open for endless debate by experts. The dimensions of Zheng He's ships are first given in this book. 3 Jules eunuch Zheng He travels to the Western Ocean. The problem is that it's a piece of fiction, a fantasy novel about Zheng He sailing to hell, written 160 years after he died. So how large were the treasure ships? The remains of a 13th century ship are preserved here at the Chuanzhou Maritime Museum. When it was excavated in 1974, its 35-meter hull was found to be far larger than experts thought possible for the period. It shows that 200 years before Zheng He, shipbuilders had mastered the benefits of triple-planked hulls and watertight bulkheads to contain flooding and strengthen the hull. Could these techniques allow Zheng He's shipwrights to build even larger vessels? The first clues came to light in 1957, when archaeologists excavated the former dry docks of the Ming Dragon shipyard in Nanjing. They unearthed huge beams that dated back to Zheng He's time. Dr. Hua Guorong explains that key evidence to confirm the size of Zheng He's ships is the remains of a giant rudder.
这个很多造船的一些先生们、一些专家，就根据我们这个舵杆的长度，它能够对当时明代郑和下西洋的宝船的多长，它能够做点推测。有专家认为，当时说根据这个舵杆的长度，它完全可能做出当时史料记载的长44丈、宽18丈这么大的一个。
Zhang Ji-kit is a naval architect who disagrees.
There are a lot of technical and operational constraints to operate such a large vessel.
He believes treasure ships this size would have been too big to control, and that wood simply isn't strong enough to build seagoing vessels that would have weighed more than 10,000 tons. Support for this argument may be found in this Buddhist prayer sheet. It's the only contemporary image of Zheng He's ships. With only 4 masts instead of 9, the ships seem to be a more conventional size.
We figured out that the vessel is probably about 60 or 62 meters long.
That would make Zheng He's treasure ships about half the length claimed in the 16th century novel, but still far larger than anything the Europeans built at the time. In winter of 1405, as soon as the northeast monsoon starts blowing, Zheng He's armada finally sets sail for the Indian Ocean. Until that moment, the 34-year-old Zheng He had probably never even been to sea. Though these weren't voyages of discovery, Zheng He's first mission was very ambitious: to make his way down to Java, up through the Straits of Malacca, past Sumatra, and then on to the destination the emperor chose: the Kingdom of Calicut on India's Malabar coast. The reason he'd come halfway round the world was the reason that Calicut was world famous. Pepper. Pepper would have fascinated the Yongle Emperor, not just for its zest as a spice, but as a remedy for stomach and heart problems. In China, it was so rare, it was sometimes used in place of money.
This was the largest single item that we find on the records. Vast amounts were brought in. And this is something that the Chinese had not had before.
But Zhang He had come prepared to trade. His holds filled with precious silks. And in particular, Ming Dynasty porcelain, which was valued across the region for its strength and beauty. Zhang He spends the first 3 months of 1407 trading on the emperor's behalf. His skill as a negotiator is tested as he barters for precious stones, pearls, coral, and tons of pepper. Ma Huan describes how deals were struck.
The chief and the chetty, with His Excellency the eunuch, all join hands together. And the broker then says, in such and such a moon, on such and such a day, we have all joined hands and sealed our agreement with a handshake. Whether the price be dear or cheap, we will never repudiate it or change it.
By late spring, monsoon winds start blowing from the southwest, so the fleet heads back to China, laden with its priceless cargo. But trade was only part of the reason for Zhang He's voyages. With up to 300 ships, his missions most likely had an ulterior motive, a uniquely Chinese agenda that would be inconceivable to Western thinkers at the time. To understand this better, we would need to understand the mind of the man who ordered the missions, Emperor Yongle. Yongle was one of the most visionary and ruthless of all Chinese emperors. In 1402, he usurps the throne from his nephew after a 3-year civil war and executes any civil servants who won't support him. Thousands die. Yongle has 2 burning ambitions: to restore Chinese culture after centuries of Mongol rule, and to legitimize his claim to the throne. Moving China's capital from Nanjing to Beijing, he builds the largest palace in the world, the Forbidden City. He also fortifies and extends the Great Wall to prevent the Mongols invading from the north. His ambitions know no limit. Dr. Ji Shijia is a leading authority on Ming history and has spent years probing the layers of Yongle's character. He's found intriguing clues in an old quarry not far from Nanjing. Here, the emperor commanded a giant rock slab be cut to create a vast monument to his father, and he would stop at nothing to achieve his ambition, even if it meant working his stonemasons to death.
据传说，一天就这个石渣子，一个人要浇3斗3升，斗啊这么大的斗，3斗3升，你浇不了3斗3升，就杀头。
But the project was a total folly. Before it was finished, the emperor was told it was too big to move. It remains here today, a monument to megalomania.
它的蜀碑里传呢，我们中国人讲的名为树别人，实际上树自己，将他老子多大的功劳 实际上说他的功劳。
In his endless search for praise and confirmation, the emperor began to look beyond China's borders.
He was particularly concerned to ensure that nobody would question his legitimacy. And one way of proving that was to have lots and lots of rulers from elsewhere come and acknowledge his heavenly position as son of heaven. And that was important to him.
In the Confucian universe, the world was neatly ordered in a social hierarchy, with the emperor at the very top. His job, to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. If foreign rulers could be persuaded to offer tribute, the emperor believed the gods would indeed smile on him, and his dynasty would last forever. Zheng He's mission, therefore, was to bring the world to its knees.
He was not sent to go and look for new places. What he was looking for were any rulers who could be persuaded to acknowledge Emperor Yongle.
Exacting tribute was an art in itself, and Zheng He was a true master of diplomacy. Much like power broking today, rulers were wined and dined, seduced by demonstrations of China's finest. Local rulers were expected to offer tribute. In return, China would agree to trade, an ancient most favored nation treaty of sorts. Envoys were invited to board the ship for the long journey to China, so they could offer these gifts in person to the emperor himself. The most extraordinary of these were rare animals never seen before in China. The creature that amazed the court the most was a present from the ruler of Malindi in present-day Kenya, one solemn giraffe.
Extraordinary how this giraffe was brought in these ships across the Indian Ocean. And the Mandarins are fascinated, and they had tried to find in their classical text some way of naming this animal which I've never seen before. They found classical terms, and they wrote poetry to it, they painted it, and they generally thought this was a most remarkable creature indeed.
But if a ruler did not like the idea of becoming China's vassal, there was always the threat of military force.
The first years of Yongle's reign were marked by violence. The invasion of Vietnam, of Dai Viet, the invasion of a number of Thai polities in what is today Yunnan province, and the sending of these huge maritime missions abroad. Anyone who looks at the actions which occurred during those voyages will see that they were certainly not intended to be peaceful or friendly.
Military force proved that China would stop at nothing to protect its interests. By restricting trade with China to countries that offered tribute, the emperor sought to establish a state-run monopoly on international trade.
He did this by turning up with 25 to 30,000 armed men, a fleet of up to 200 plus ships, and suggested that the people might like to either demonstrate some sort of submission to the Ming or face the consequences.
Chinese court records for the 6th of July 1411 describe how Zheng He, provoked by rebel attacks on his ship, leads an army to the capital of Ceylon, where he captures its king for disrespecting the emperor.
They were heavily armed ships, bearing the best weapons of the age. They were intended to dominate. They were intended to institute a Pax Ming through the region, through the maritime realm.
But some historians believe there were good reasons for the fleet to be armed.
yes, they were armed. The ships were armed. There were lots of soldiers and sailors on board, and they have to after defend the majesty of the emperor. So they could not allow these ships to be taken by pirates or to be seized by the local rulers. So they have to be pretty strongly guarded.
Zheng He's armada had become a formidable power on the sea, and the message spreads throughout the ports of call: pay tribute to China, or be prepared to pay the cost. In pursuit of treasure and tribute, Zheng He's fleet enters the waters of the Arabian Sea for the first time in 1414. For half a millennia, Arab traders had been master navigators, plying these waters in simple one- or two-masted boats known as dhows. These merchants began to dominate the trade routes between India, Arabia, and Africa, regularly sailing as far as China. A 9th century Arab observer reports, "Whoever wants to sail to China must cross 7 seas, each one with its own color and wind and fish and breeze, completely unlike the sea that lies beside it."
The routes were all set. They were known routes. In particular, the Indians, the Persians, and the Arabs have been at it for a long, long time. So you could send somebody like Zheng He, and he would find enough experts to actually enable these expeditions to travel safely, to get to the destinations they want to, and so on.
To find those experts, he would visit the city of Quanzhou on the southeast coast of China, once one of the busiest ports in the world, and home to as many as 40,000 Muslims. Dr. Wang Lian Mao is an expert on the city's maritime history. He's uncovered clues that suggest Zheng He did indeed recruit navigators in these parts.
这诗人啊，他写了一首诗，非常形象。里头有2句话，他说了，就是船头吃脚半环上，大波高墙多海堡。
Village chief Guo lives in Bachi, a Muslim village a few kilometers up the road from Quanzhou. He says his ancestors sailed with Zheng He.
我们是来自阿拉伯的，我们知道是从海上西楚记录里来到泉州做生意。因为阿拉伯人有2个特点，一个是航海，一个是这个经商。
These were 2 qualities Zheng He would need if his voyages were to be a success.
但是要说无经济，也略小些有经济。从老前辈说，那地用、下西用、正经有，但是得话2摆2次。
The story goes that over a game of chess, Zheng He proposes to the Arab navigators that they join him in his voyages to the edges of the known world. At first, they're not convinced. But he offers good pay and help with local problems.
那当时传说是说地河的军队，因为那个海底下当原本是咧围海造成的，所以地河来到迄个所在，伊带成啊军队要下西洋啊。 来协助、帮助阮三甲做迄桩题。
With his Arab navigators at the helm, Zheng He's armada catches the northwest monsoon winds that start blowing each January. At the time, the Arabs were considered the greatest long-distance navigators, and Zheng He relied on many of their innovations. It is thought, for example, that although the Chinese invented the magnetic compass, it was the Arabs who refined its use at sea. Zheng He pooled the knowledge of Chinese and Arab navigators to create nautical charts, some of which have survived thanks to this copy made in the 17th century. These made it possible to steer along the coast from China all the way to Africa by reference to landmarks that can be seen from the deck of a ship. They showed sandbars, rocks, and features recognizable from the sea. The treacherous Strait of Malacca. All 7 expeditions passed through these waters. And Zheng He's charts can still be used to navigate them.
So somebody came across from Calais.
Master mariner Captain P.J. Rivers has great respect for the ingenuity of ancient mapmakers.
You'll be looking at that. That doesn't run from east to west, perhaps. It runs north, south, right. Here it might be north and south. Here it might be east and west. Here it might be northwest, southwest. You never know. It might have been going any old way. You couldn't care less because you're not sailing by your compass, you're sailing by the shore. And as long as you're sailing along the shore, you're looking to see, oh, that's a mountain there. See here, these are the islands off here. I must be in here somewhere.
But how did Zheng He navigate once land slipped beneath the horizon, amid the immensity and unknown terrors of the open sea? Here, Zheng He relied on his star maps, most likely supplied by his Arab navigators. This one shows which constellations to follow from the southwest of India to the Persian Gulf, together with their height above the horizon.
Coming into land, you take soundings. That is, you'd take the depth of water, you'd lower something to pick up whatever it is on the bottom, the type of mud and one thing and another, give you an idea of what it's all about. And those sailors, they could tell, the Arabs use the word isharat. They could tell from the change of the color of the water, from the clouds, watching for birds, signs that land were near.
Somebody did their homework. These fleets knew exactly where they were going and why. All you have to do is look at a map and see that the destinations of the Ming fleets was all the strategic ports in the Indian Ocean trading network. This is information that could only have come from very experienced traders. And the experienced traders at this day were Muslim.
In 1419, the fleet reaches Yemen, landing at Aden, the most westerly port in the Indian Ocean. Commanding the entrance to the Red Sea and the caravan routes to the north, it was the hub between Europe, Egypt, Arabia, and the Orient. One of its attractions for the Chinese was a resin extracted from trees in the Yemeni desert. Incense. Not only was it thought to cure many ailments, its fragrance was believed to imbue people with a sense of joy, making its price even higher than gold.
Yemen was always referred to as Happy Arabia, largely because it produced frankincense, which was so sought after that Yemen became a sort of mythical land where this magical substance was produced. And I say magical because it was the one means of communication with the divinity. obviously in the 15th century it was still being produced in enough quantity for it to be mentioned by Mark Wan, and certainly the Chinese would have loved it.
The ruler of Yemen gave Zheng He gifts for the emperor, including 2 gold belts embedded with jewels. But Yemeni chroniclers were puzzled by China's attitudes and assumptions.
They clearly thought that the Emperor of China's apparent desire to dominate this by sending such huge fleets was simply ridiculous.
But such mutual misperceptions did nothing to stop the flow of trade. And leaving Yemen, the treasure fleet follows the Arab trading route south down the African coast. There's been much speculation that Zheng He discovered America, but there is no reliable evidence to prove this. And chronicles written during the voyages name this as the most distant point he reached: Malindi, in present-day Kenya. Today, it's a tourist destination, but Malindi was once a wealthy city-state, settled by Arab merchants who dominated trade between Africa and the Indian Ocean.
What they were really interested in was the gold of Africa, which came from the interior. And this gold was the thing that actually fueled the entire system, because African gold was used to pay for the luxury goods like pepper and so forth.
Africa was China's El Dorado, a land of inexhaustible mysteries and treasure. Here, at the ruins of a medieval city called Gede, just 15 kilometers south of Malindi, a structure surrounded by dense jungle takes us back to the Africa of Zheng He's time. Mr. Abdallah Ali Al-Losi, the curator of the site, says porcelain pieces, once part of this 600-year-old mosque, may be evidence of a Chinese visit.
In the 15th century, this town, it was flourishing like a young rose flower. And it was then Cheng Ho visited this part of the world. Some of the items which were fitted here, the porcelain bowls, could have been brought by him. Since he was a Muslim, he thought of bringing some presents to the Muslims wherever he would land.
After 6 centuries, not much evidence remains of either Malindi's glories or a visit from Zheng He's fleet. But on a remote island called Partey, there are rumors of a shipwreck long ago and strangely Chinese traditions. It's been said their style of basket weaving is similar to that used in southern China, and some of the inhabitants have far lighter skin color than people elsewhere in Kenya. Baraka Badishi belongs to one of a handful of clans here that claim Chinese lineage. The story goes that when the shipwrecked sailors from Zheng He's fleet made it ashore, they married local women. Scientists in China have tested her DNA and believe that her family is indeed descended from the Chinese. On its own, this can't prove a connection with the voyagers. But her story is given extra resonance by a precious heirloom, a small porcelain bowl.
Umefahamu ni ndogo, akawa kusikia tuambiwa kwamba hawa asili yao watokana na Wachina, watoka Washanga, asili yao ni Washanga, na asili hao Washanga ni kwamba ni hao Wachina ambao asili yao ni Washanga.
If Baraka's ancestors were indeed shipwrecked, the loss of the ship and its treasures can only have added to the mounting cost of Zheng He's voyages. It's been estimated that the fleets cost the imperial treasury more than $6 billion per annum in today's terms. A phenomenally expensive way of supporting the emperor's sense of destiny. Back in China, criticism of the voyages was growing. The mandarins were starting to ask some awkward questions.
What was the point of these missions overseas? Yes, it was to establish the legitimacy of Yongle, but he'd already established his legitimacy sort of 5 years into his reign. Were they still needed?
After so much time at sea, Zheng He was so out of touch, he had no idea how much things had changed back home. On the night of May 9th, 1421, lightning strikes the Forbidden City, just 4 months after its completion. For Emperor Yongle, it may have been a sign that the gods were angry. Within 3 years, he is dead, his son inheriting the throne. Zheng He finds himself sidelined. The new emperor has little interest in his father's grandiose schemes, and China turns its back on the sea. It is believed that mandarins destroyed his logbooks and papers, determined that China would never repeat such a ruinously expensive policy. By the end of the century, building ships with more than 2 masts is banned upon pain of death. And the government orders the destruction of all ocean-going vessels. China's days as a maritime superpower were over.
How can you dominate an ocean the size of the Indian Ocean? The only people that ever succeeded in doing this came very shortly later, and these were the Portuguese.
65 years after Zheng He's last fleet returns home, Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama enters the waters of the Indian Ocean, ushering in a new era of European domination.
If the Chinese had maintained a fleet, they certainly would have given the Portuguese a run for their money. There's no doubt about it.
Today, 6 centuries later, China is rediscovering Zheng He. In Nanjing, across the river from the site his treasure ships were built, a group of shipwrights have found their own way to mark the anniversary of Zheng He's first voyage.
我们是根据为什么根据纪念600周年这个活动来想，我想到嘛，他这个是7次下西洋，历时28年。那我说我们搞了个2米8长，宽度我1米07，就那7次下西洋，就这个样，就这么一个情况。跟那个。 郑和，他是中国的伟大航海家，应该叫他也是我们世界这个人民的一个啊。所以我作为我们所炎黄子孙，我就感到就是中国人为中国人很自豪。
Zheng He now represents China's new determination to engage with the modern world.
Now, Zheng He is a symbol of something quite different. In a way, it has nothing to do with Zheng He anymore. It is a very useful way of all the possibilities and potentials that Chinese people are now interested in developing.
In Zheng He's birthplace in Yunnan, a compass has been set in the grounds of his father's tomb, a place for Shu Ke-de to contemplate the man whose story still grips his imagination.
他把他的一生，把他的全部精力和心血 贡献了给了我们祖国和世界的航海事业，所以他是一个伟大的航海家、外交家和和平的使者。
Yet, despite all the debates about his voyages, we have no documents that tell us anything about Zheng He the man. And he left no record of the extraordinary personal odyssey that fate had sent him on. The closest we can get to Zheng He's feelings is the inscription he left in a temple before setting off on his final voyage. His own brief account of almost 30 years at sea.
We have traversed more than 100,000 li of immense water spaces, and have beheld in the ocean huge waves like mountains rising sky high. We have gone to more than 30 countries, large and small, and we have set eyes on barbarian regions far away, hidden in a blue transparency of light vapors, while our sails, loftily unfurled like clouds day and night, continued their course, rapid like that of a star, traversing those savage waves as if we were treading a public thoroughfare.